Imagine waking up next to your food, maybe even sleeping in it. It sounds gross, but that was normal for some Romans, especially the poor. They often slept in their kitchens near the fire. But why? Let's find out what life was like in ancient Rome. Emperor Nero once infamously set fire to Rome. You've probably heard of that. But fires weren't an uncommon occurrence in ancient Rome. The city was crowded and most buildings were made of wood. There were lots of fires, so much so that Emperor Nero established a fire brigade. One of the reasons there were so many fires was because people used oil lamps for light instead of electricity. They also cooked over open fires, which obviously could get out of control. And when they slept around those fires, things would go really wrong. But why did people sleep there? In modern times, we usually think of kitchens as places where we just make food. We don't spend any time there outside of making our food or eating. But in ancient Rome, people spent all of their time in the kitchen. Ancient Roman houses didn't have a lot of rooms. Usually a house would have an entrance hall, a courtyard, a dining room, and a kitchen. The kitchen would also be where they did everything else. Ate, drank, slept, made clothes, and stored possessions. The kitchen was the center of the household, and if you were rich, you had servants who did all the work. You might have had a slave assigned to the kitchen who cooked your food. But if you were poor, you had to do it all yourself. If you were poor and you slept in your kitchen, cooking might not have been the only thing you did there. If you were very poor, you may have slept curled up right next to your cooking fire. This was for warmth and protection. Your fire could keep wild animals away, and it was a way to protect yourself from other people who wanted to steal your stuff. It wasn't always easy to stay warm in ancient Rome. Most people wore tunics, which is kind of like a big taché. It was one piece of clothing, and women sometimes wore a big shawl. But no matter what you wore, it was never enough to keep you warm during the winters. So people relied on their fires for heat. But these fires were dangerous. One gust of wind or one stray ember could cause a massive disaster. That's why it makes sense that people would want to sleep near their fire to keep it safe. At the same time though, that's also the worst place to sleep if a fire breaks out. Archaeologists found the remains of burnt-out kitchens with people still inside them. These people died in the fires that destroyed their homes. Even today, people will die trying to save their possessions from a fire. And back then, people were trying to save the things that they owned because they didn't have insurance. If something like a fire destroyed your home, you were responsible for replacing everything. If you were rich, this wasn't a huge deal. If you were poor, well, that meant you had to start from scratch. Sleeping by your fire also had some benefits. As I mentioned before, you were safer from wild animals. Fires can burn away potential predators, and the smoke coming from your fire might keep them away. Also, you wouldn't have to worry about people stealing your possessions because if they got too close, they could burn too. Another reason that people slept in their kitchens was because of the food. If you lived in ancient Rome, you likely went to bed hungry. Meals weren't regular and food was scarce, so some people tried to get an early start on dinner by going to sleep next to it. In some cases, people would actually sleep in their food. You might see dogs lazing about in piles of grain, or cats taking a nap in the fish market. People were no different. A ceramic bowl was like a pillow for someone sleeping next to their food. The poor were constantly hungry. They looked for opportunities to eat whatever they could. Food was expensive and hard to come by, so people who were living in poverty took advantage of every opportunity. There was a popular form of entertainment in ancient Rome called the Circus Maximus. There were chariot races and other events where common folk could win food. Chariot racing was a huge deal. People would bet large sums of money on these races, and food was the prize. Sometimes people won enough food to last them for days. Many people who slept in their kitchens were homeless or close to it. They might have lost their jobs or their homes due to a fire, or maybe they never had a home in the first place. There were thousands of people living in abject poverty in ancient Rome. People would sleep wherever they could find, on the streets, in parks, under bridges, or anywhere they could get out of the elements. When the weather turned cold, these people sought out the few sources of heat that were available. Most public buildings like temples, basilicas, and even taverns had open fires that the homeless could use to keep warm. But after a while, the people who ran these businesses got tired of the homeless using their fires. They didn't want people getting too cozy and making themselves at home. Emperor Augustus eventually banned the homeless from warming themselves at public buildings. He also made it illegal to sleep on the streets. The homeless were pushed out of the cities into the countryside. There are a few records of people being arrested for sleeping by a fire. Some people kept warm at taverns, but the homeless quickly learned that they couldn't stay too long. When the tavern owners shooed them away, the homeless people had to find somewhere else to go. Sleeping in the street was dangerous because people could easily step on you and kill you. The taverns were better than the streets, but still not great. Many people chose to sleep by a fire rather than risk being crushed to death or freezing to death. So if you were poor in ancient Rome, you might curl up and fall asleep next to your fire. Just make sure that you don't fall asleep next to your food. You might end up like the cat that ate too much fish and took a nap, then woke up with a bellyache, but don't take my word for it. Check out this fresco from Pompeii. This artwork shows a sleeping woman in what looks like her kitchen. She's curled up next to a small fire, and it seems like she might be homeless. Her hair and clothes look messy, and she's sleeping in a doorway. This painting was made around 79 AD, and sadly, it might be the last thing this woman ever saw. Mount Vesuvius erupted that year and covered the city of Pompeii in ash. It was a terrible natural disaster that killed thousands of people. A lot of what we know about ancient Rome comes from the ruins of Pompeii. Archaeologists uncovered this mural about a century ago. Since then, it's given us a glimpse into what daily life was like in ancient Rome. Now, if you're curious about what daily life was like for other groups of people, check out this video about what daily life was like in the Ottoman Empire. Don't forget to hit the like button if you learned something new. Thanks for watching.